Fatigue makes cowards of us all. It's an oft-repeated quote by General Patton. However, there are two ways which we can respond to this temptation toward cowardice. We can give into it, or we can fight through it. And when I was writing Draft 2, I was suffering from the consequences of having chosen to give in. While struggling to get my sleep back to normal, I slowly descended into escapism and let my days become compilations of gaming, watching old TV series, and ignoring the fact that I was being the fatigued coward. To the point that by the time I started working on Draft 2, I was feeling weak and unmotivated. But I knew I had to take this first step, embark on the journey to rebuild my momentum, and to finish Draft 2 by my self-imposed deadline of 10 days. Because if I kept procrastinating, then I might never start. Okay, so I'm going to get started here working on Draft 2. Just fixing up various things. In the last video, I figured out all of the actionable steps that I'm going to take. So now it's just a matter of working through these one by one until I'm done with the whole list. So I just knocked off the first two items on the list. Obviously, I still have quite a bit left to go, but these were pretty significant items. One of them was updating a large portion of an important scene, and the other was updating the majority of the catalyst for Ella. I like the way that this came out much more because it sets up much more of an intense character motivation for Ella and actual reasons why she cares about what she's doing over the course of this book. Because before, her reasons were kind of weak, and it didn't really feel like she really needed to do it, or like she should really care as much as she does. So I think this new character motivation will support her character so much better and make her much more relatable and interesting to read. Because I let myself get so deep into distraction, after only 2 hours, I was too weak to continue and decided to keep working the next day. So next, I think I'm going to work a little bit more on this last scene, and I just want to touch up some specific aspects of the way this character Atanaze is acting during the scene. I want to include a little bit of his reactions more because I didn't really do that as much, and his reactions are kind of important to know where things are going. And then after that, I want to remove one of the scenes that is no longer needed, move up the one after that, and then write a complete new scene after that. So that will be quite a bit. We'll see how long it takes me, but I'm really excited to write this new scene because it's going to be so much more interesting than what was previously going on, and it's going to immediately create this bump in stakes for Ella as well as conflict between the people in the group. Okay, so I just knocked two more things off the list here. I knocked out the first thing where I was trying to make sure that Atanaze is showing his emotions during the last scene that I was working on, the catalyst for Ella. And I do think the changes I made there definitely spiced things up a little bit. However, it took longer than I anticipated to make those changes. So I ended up actually switching to working on something different than I originally intended. I was originally planning on writing a completely new scene for Ella where she's having this clash that is going to lead to conflict in the future for the group. However, because I knew there was going to be a ton of dialogue in that, and I didn't have that much time left in the writing session, basically I saw that I only had 20 minutes to reach my 2-hour minimum and was allowing myself to make an excuse for why I wasn't going to do the work I said I was going to do. Okay, back to the excuses. I decided that I was going to work on something different, and so instead I worked on making Pramana's opening scene more gripping and making it higher stakes for Pramana so that we're pulling the reader in the beginning of the story rather than having this more mellow opening for him. So I was able to do all of that in this last block, and that definitely spiced things up for him, and I like the way that it's going much more because it kind of draws him into this situation unaware, whereas before he was more suspicious as he was entering the situation, and I think I like the feeling of him kind of being thrown right into it more than him slowly getting into it. Anyway, so that is what I was just working on. I'll be back to continue tomorrow with more of these bullet points. I continued to make this slow progress even though in my gut I knew that I wasn't satisfied stopping after just 2 hours of work. and my mental laziness culminated on the 5th day of revision. I was just looking through the entire list of things that I have left to do, and there's quite a few things, and part of where I was having some trouble is knowing what to work on first, since a lot of the things are interconnected. But for now, at least, one of the things that I know I can work on in isolation is Lucian's backstory, and make sure it's adding to the overall story that I want to tell with the backstory, and that it feels congruent, that it actually feels like this could justify the way Lucian is acting earlier in the story. So very quickly I realized that I need to do a little bit of research to figure out how kids, in this case Lucian, would develop beliefs from their parents, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. While doing this research, part of me knew that I wasn't really making much progress and should stop. But the lazy part of me wanted to avoid the difficulty of thinking through the problem myself. So I just spent far too long researching and trying to figure out about the different developmental stages in children and how they form beliefs and all of that stuff. And I didn't come away with very much in the way of new information, which is not ideal since I just spent over an hour doing that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to try to think through the problem myself and think through what could cause Lucian to come away with a certain belief, his kind of flaw at the beginning of the story, what could cause him to believe that, what behavior demonstrated by his dad could cause him to come to that conclusion. I do want to take some time at least here just to think through these ideas and get some decisions made so that way I can come back tomorrow and actually start implementing them, but I'm getting pretty tired. Anyway, let's just get into it. I figured out what stages I want to go through in the overall arc of the backstory scenes and the relationship between the different members of the family. And I also figured out how I want his mother to factor in as well and kind of influencing his beliefs. So at least I know how to proceed next time. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I made a ton of progress today. Today I'm going to be working through these backstory scenes, taking the things that I figured out at the end of yesterday and applying them to the backstory. I have 4 major progressions that I created yesterday, and I'm going to be spreading them out across 6 scenes, I think. I really want to emphasize each of these progressions so that it makes the overall arc of the story feel really congruent and resonant with the reader. So I just worked through every single backstory scene for Lucian, and I think I made it a lot better. The only thing is that I do feel like I need to find a way to show the emotions a little bit better, and I might come back and do that in the future. I think that right now the big picture story aspects of it are working, and I can move on to working on some other stuff. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow to continue working on this. As the days went by only giving a half effort, I began to feel more and more guilty as I grew out of alignment with my goals. And by day 7, I'd had enough. Okay, so I have a little bit of a confession to make because on this channel I want to be honest with you guys. I want to be truthful. I want to let you know what's actually going on and the hard parts of the journey as well as the good parts. So recently, as you may have known, I have been struggling with sleep. It's getting a lot better right now, even though last night I didn't sleep that much. But it is getting a lot better in general. The problem is that because I was having these sleep troubles, I allowed myself to be weak, basically. I allowed myself to get really lax on my normal disciplines and not push myself as hard as I normally do, not do as much as I normally do, and eventually it just doesn't feel good anymore. It makes me feel incongruent, out of alignment, like I'm not actually acting in the way that I need to act if I'm going to reach the goals that I have. And unfortunately, this means that I was only doing some sort of minimal amount of revision every day, and I'm so tired of living like that. It doesn't feel good. It makes me feel bad at a personal level. Like, what the heck are you doing? Why are you behaving in a way that you know is not going to help you? So I'm done with that. I really need to hold myself to a higher standard and push myself to actually do the things that are going to move me forward. With that in mind, we're going to be getting some stuff done today. We are not settling for less today. Okay, so where I'm going to start with here is I'm just going to go through kind of chronologically. There are some scenes that I wanted to change, some chapters that I wanted to change. So I'm just going to start with the ones earlier on in the story and work my way through until I get to some of the ones that I want to change later in the story. Of course, when starting to rebuild momentum, you never want to do the work the first day. And part of me really wanted to keep being lazy and even double down on this laziness. But I knew where that would lead, and I wasn't willing to let it go any further. So I just rewrote the new version of Ella's scene. Even though this one's pretty short, I do think it's better. The other one was just kind of rambling. This one is sticking to the main points. I just finished working through this second scene. I'm going to be moving on to this next scene in chronological order. I'm adding this change basically to raise the stakes a little bit. So that's mostly going to be confined to the beginning of the scene, but it's also going to change some stuff later on, and it's going to affect another scene afterward in an interesting way. So I ended up having to update 2 scenes at the tavern to include this new sort of detail, but I still have a little bit more to work on with that to tie it into later scenes. So I'm going to be doing that right now. Okay, so I was just working through the last of the scenes in this sort of new stake raising arc. Not really an arc, but you know what I mean. I just finished up rewriting this scene, and it is so much more fun and so much more interesting the way that I've written it now. And it also ties in a character from before that I think the readers will enjoy seeing what happened with. So I only have one specific scene that I wanted to work on fixing something in. Otherwise, it's just more general things. So what I'm going to do right now is just focus on the major plot points of the story for the various characters and make sure that I'm drawing out the tension in those scenes and making them as interesting and as impactful as they can be. I really want to get everything that the scenes are worth from them. So I'm going to be using potentially 2 books here, The Emotional Craft of Fiction and Plot and Structure, to try and figure out how I'm going to be drawing out this tension. And the real reason I want to focus on these major scenes is because they're so instrumental that if I end up changing them in any significant way, it will affect the larger story. So I want to do these in this first round of triage. I thought this made sense to work on and continue trying to bring out the tension in these major scenes through the end of day 7 and into day 8. But eventually I detected a problem with this focus. Okay, so I'm realizing here that I don't think this is part of this draft of the revision process, really. I'm looking through these main scenes, but it seems like the scenes are pretty much staying the same. There's not major changes to make that would affect the story. So really what I'm trying to do is draw out tension, and that's really more for the next draft, where I'm really trying to tighten up scenes. I don't actually think this tightening up scenes, bringing out the tension, should be part of this second draft. So rather than continue with this and kind of waste time redundantly, I'm going to take a second to look into plot and structure and see how he suggests you split up the revision process. Make sure that I'm not including a bunch of other stuff that should be done in the next draft. So rather than focusing on whether I'm drawing out the tension in the scene, what he advises to focus on during this draft, at least for these big scenes, is making sure that they are surprising enough, unexpected enough, that they are big enough, that they're actually like big enough scenes to fit their role of the story in the 3-act structure. So that's the main thing that I'm going to be looking at. Okay, so I just finished looking through and reviewing every single major plot point in the story from all 3 characters' perspectives. Safe to say, that was quite a bit of work. But it was actually good, and especially the climax. I expected that the climaxes might have some problems with them, but they were actually all really well structured and very exciting. So I'm feeling good about that. There were a few things that I did have to change. For instance, there was some character motivation stuff that I had to align for Ella. There was another scene with Romana where I hadn't raised the stakes as much as I wanted to, so I had to adjust that a little bit. But overall, the adjustments that I made to these scenes were not big enough they affected the story. All of the major plot point scenes were fulfilling their purpose and were big scenes in the story. So I don't really think that any of them really needed to be made bigger or more surprising or anything like that. They did what they were supposed to do in all the cases. And I guess that's one of the strengths of doing such intense plotting. By the time I write all of these scenes, as long as I wrote them to the outline for the most part, they should be fitting the 3-act structure really well. So I'm happy that I was able to finish that. And now I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break because I've been working on this here for almost 3 hours. And then I got started on a task that I never would have guessed would take up so much time. I'm back and I'm going to start with working on one of the more general sorts of changes. Basically, there's one character who had 3 different things that I wanted to kind of touch on, make sure are emphasized when he's on screen or whatever. So I'm just going to go through from the beginning of the story all the way to the end with all the scenes that he's present and make sure I'm bringing out some of these characteristics or some of these qualities. So I finished working through the updates for this character for a decent amount of the story so far. I got to the 2 scenes after the break into first plot point, and this character is largely absent after the midpoint, so I'm mostly going to have to work through the next quarter of the story. So I've made some really good progress here. This is actually taking the longest of all the tasks I've worked on so far because some of the updates that I've had to make have been pretty major. I've changed some of his dialogue, which ended up changing the way the scene played out, if not necessarily the ending of the scene. So far I've modified 10 scenes that this character was present in, and I have about 5 or 6 full ones left to edit. So that took a lot longer than I was initially intending it to take, but I did manage to finish all of the scenes where Atanaze was present. So that was a huge thing to check off my list. I am getting kind of close to dinner time. However, I would still like to finish one more little thing for the day here. So I'm going to take care of one of these scenes that I've already done a decent amount with. It's basically giving one of the opposition sort of characters kind of a bad guy, giving him a little bit more humanity. So that is what I'm going to focus on here. Having taken a large chunk of day 8 and almost all of day 9 updating Atanaze's scenes, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to finish the remaining work on the 10th day. So today I have a few things that I want to focus on. Making supporting characters a little bit more interesting, giving them more personality. Another is making sure that Lucian's blind spot in this story, he slowly becomes a little bit more self-aware of it. So I want to try to spread that out through the story. And the last thing, I'm not even sure if I want to add this or not, but I might. Basically, I was thinking of this thing that could happen with Ella and that could be a signal for this powerful outside force that, despite not being present in the story, is still influencing them. So those are the 3 main things that I'm looking into here today. I'm going to start off with the personality stuff and improving the supporting characters because that's definitely the most difficult of the 3 things. Also, I'm not even sure if this book is going to be useful to me. I read this book in the past. It's called Getting the Character. Mostly it's about making your characters more realistic and using method acting to make your characters better. But specifically what I would like to do if I can here is figure out how to make their personalities a little bit more interesting. I'm not sure if there was something about that in this book, but I'm going to take a look potentially and see. So I just went through and figured out the values for one of these characters and how that shows up in his traits and mannerisms and stuff like that. So this is exactly what I was looking for when I was trying to think about how to make my characters better. It's kind of funny because I already read this book 2 years ago. So I may have to make a video on this book because there are definitely some good lessons, and I remember there was some really cool stuff in here. We'll see about that one in the near future, but for now, I'm going to work through the story and the scenes that this character is present in and try to look for opportunities to bring out some of these traits and these mannerisms. So I just finished working through all the scenes for these 2 characters and including more of their new personality characteristics in these scenes. So I am back from my break and ready to knock the rest of this out. I think there's actually only one thing left for me to do because originally I was planning on adding this element to the story where Ella kind of sees proof of the power of this antagonist from the previous book. However, I don't think there's enough space for it, and I've already demonstrated his presence in multiple multiple ways previously. So I'm just gonna hold off on that. If when I read through the next draft, I realize that it doesn't really feel right, then maybe I will figure out a way to add that in. So that leaves me with one thing left to work on, and that is making sure that Lucian's character change in the story feels organic, and especially his shift from being unaware of the way that he has been acting and why he's been acting like that, becoming more self-aware and realizing it, and then being able to change it. At this point in the day, it was getting late, I was tired, and I was tempted to put off updating the rest of Lucian's scenes until later. But I decided to keep going. Okay, so I just finished going through for Lucian for a lot of his scenes and figuring out how he was slowly going to grow into this self-awareness. Just like hinting at that at various important points in the story and points where it made sense for him to think about this stuff and reflect on it. So now I've actually finished all of the changes that I want to make for this draft. All the stuff that's crossed out is stuff that I changed. So I managed to finish draft 2 today. Hey, good stuff, right? Somehow, I don't even know how I did it because I slept really weird last night. No, anyway, I'm looking forward to getting to read through this next and to see how it all comes together. Hopefully, it'll be so much better. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a future video, but for now, I have finished draft 2. These 10 days were some of the most important that I've had recently, because even though a lot of times you guys see me working really hard, one thing I've struggled with is maintaining momentum when I have problems with sleep or not being able to exercise. And while I'd like to get rid of these periods of low momentum completely, I am proud that I was able to get back on track and finish draft 2 despite the challenges I faced.